Hello, Telvanni here, and I wanted to do a quick follow-up to my last map science video on Delirium Mirrors. If you haven't seen that one yet, I recommend you go and watch it and come back, as this video is meant to be a supplementary video to that one, and we are going to be building a little further upon some of the discoveries made over there. Also, I'd like to note that this test is going to be a little smaller in scope than most of our mapping tests, as it is taking a look at directly modifying a previous test. Alright, so with that little bit of a disclaimer out of the way, let's take a look at what all we are changing for this mini test. Last video, we discovered that Divination Scarabs hardly added any value to our maps. We also saw that Harbingers, while worth running due to their consistent value and low effort, didn't contribute a whole lot to our overall profits. Next, while we learned that Expedition was quite profitable, it could be a little challenging in Deep Delirium. Finally, I had several people in the comment section mention I should test out going full Blight, picking up Breach, going all out on Beyond, and grabbing all of the map modifier nodes on the tree. So that is exactly what we are going to do here. We've got our tree set up like this for our mini experiment. We're grabbing all of the Beyond nodes and Blight nodes. We haven't taken Distilled Fungus this time around, as our Corrupting Sextant makes it so that we cannot extract oil from any of the anointed jewelry that drops. We are taking the traditional Delirium nodes in this area, wrapping around the top of the tree this time to pick up the increased map modifier nodes. Over here we are taking all of the Legion, Breach, and Eater of World nodes, and finally grabbing this Abyss node for a few points. You'll note that we have dropped all of our Harbinger, Expedition, and Essence nodes to do this, which, if you remember from the last video, was netting us about 30 chaos per map. We'll have to see if the changes made here are able to make up for those losses. Next, let's take a very quick look at what Scarabs and Sextants we are going to be running. You'll note that I swapped out Harbinger, Divination, and Expedition for Blight, Breach, and Abyss Scarabs. Having added in a Blight Scarab, we have dropped the Blighted Sextant and added a Beyond Sextant. Here you can see our expenses for this mini test. We are going to be running 12 juiced Beyond maps. We spent about 3.5 chaos per Promenade map, and then another 13 chaos or so per map rolling Beyond onto them. Honestly, I think this is a little on the low side, as I believe on average it's more like 20 to 30 chaos to get Beyond. Next, we bought Legion Scarabs for 7 chaos each. Breach Scarabs were 10 chaos each. Abyss Scarabs were fairly cheap at 4 chaos each. And Blight Scarabs were also very cheap, at about 3 chaos each. Next, we bought our Delirium Mirror Sextants for 285 chaos, our Corrupting Sextants for 144. Our Legion Sextants were fairly cheap, only costing 45 chaos total. And our Beyond Sextants were almost as expensive as our Delirium Mirror Sextants, ringing in at 225 chaos. Finally, we will be running Curec Beyond on all of our maps for an additional 60 chaos. And as usual, we will be running Alva Temples on every map. This brings our total expenses up to over 100 chaos per map. This is a 20 chaos increase from our last Delirium test. Going into this, I know we will make profit from this test. However, I am finding myself hard-pressed to believe that we will make up the profit losses from removing Essence, Expedition, and Harbinger, while at the same time we are adding over 20 chaos and expenses per map, even considering how lucky we were rolling Beyond onto our maps. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, I'll start running these maps, and I'll see you on the flip side. Alright, we are back. I've just finished running our 12 map test, and I've got a few things to say. First off, I'm pretty sure Chris Wilson finally enabled the content creator RNG on my account, as I had 4 raw Exalted Orbs drop in our 12 maps. I also had some incredibly good RNG when it came to Blighted maps. Next, I think it is important to note that these maps were taking the same amount of time to run per map as our previous Delirium test, capping out at a maximum of 4 and a minimum of 3 maps per hour. Finally, as usual, I did not interact with the Arc Nemesis mechanic at all during this test, so if you are attempting to replicate these results, you may find slightly higher profits. Moving on, let's take a quick look at what we are including and excluding from this test. Here we have our excluded loot. It includes most of our maps, junk contracts, trash divination cards, and lower tier currencies. It also has all of our incubators, uniques, fragments, and mid-tier cluster jewels. As we are not running essences on our Atlas passive tree this time around, I have excluded all essences from our profits, as I don't think it is reasonable to sell essence at a small stack size. Here we have everything else that we are including. On the left, we have our favorited, uncorrupted maps, valuable contracts, and miscellaneous currencies. Up here, we have all the scarabs that dropped. We even had a winged scarab drop from Harvest. Over here, we have our boss maps and invitations. Most of them dropped corrupted due to our sextants and have lowered in value. Here we have our blighted maps. We honestly got incredibly lucky with blighted maps, pulling in 29 in 12 maps. Seriously, Chris, what have you done? Next up, we have our breach-related drops. I have valued our breach rings at 1 chaos each. I know they were selling for much higher in bulk a few weeks back, however I think the prices have dropped a little bit. Down here we have our Legion loot. We actually got very unlucky, to the point that I think we lost a little money running Legion, as we only had 1 Mariketh Legion appear in over 24 Legion encounters, which is very atypical. Next we have our Divine Orbs. We dropped 128 Divine Orbs in 12 maps, averaging out to be about 10.5 Divine Orbs per map. This is a pretty sizable increase from our last test, as we are running 2 additional sources of Beyond Chance in this mini test. Here we have all of our Delirium Orbs and Simulacrum Splinters. In this 12 map test, we actually had 6 maps in which we dropped a stack of 300 Simulacrum Splinters. I guess the extra Beyond and map modifier nodes were really putting in work for these. Next up, we had 8 Dying Anguish and 10 Patient cards drop. Again, I think we got a little lucky with these, as we actually had more Patient cards than Dying Anguish drop during this mini test. Finally, we had 4 raw Exalted Orbs drop during this test. And while I do believe that this strategy is more likely to drop raw Exalted Orbs due to the Beyond passives, I think this is a significantly higher drop rate than you would expect to find running these maps. I haven't excluded any of these from our initial calculations, but we will go over some what-if scenarios here in a minute. Moving on, let's take a quick look at how this strategy turned out, and then move on to taking a look at each individual piece of this strategy. For our initial investment, we spent about 7.5 exalts. However, we had over 31x in revenue drop, which is a little over a 4 times return on our expenses. Taking a look at each piece of our strategy, Delirium expenses were 285 Chaos and Mirror Sextants, but we had a whopping 1,033 Chaos worth of Delirium Orbs and Simulacrums. This brought our profit per map from Delirium up to just over 60 Chaos, which is quite a bit higher than in our last tests. However, you do have to keep in mind stuff like Abyss and Breach, and I guess even Legion for this mini test, as we got unlucky with Mariketh, should probably be factored into our expenses for Delirium and Corrupting Sextants, as we weren't making any profit off of them, and they were purely here to add juice to our Delirium and Beyond strategy. Ultimately, even with those considerations, Delirium is definitely worth running if you have a strong build that can handle it. Next up, we had Beyond and Corrupting Sextants. We had 960 Chaos worth of Divine Orbs drop during this test, which we are attributing to the Corrupting Sextants paired with Beyond. We spent a total of 551 Chaos between rolling our maps to have Beyond on them, purchasing Beyond and Corrupting Sextants, and paying for the Keurig Beyond craft. This means we profited 409 Chaos and 12 maps, or around 34 Chaos per map. I would definitely say the Sextant is worth it, even if you factor in the cost of the league mechanics we weren't profiting from, how lucky we were rolling Beyond onto our maps, and the profit losses from corrupted maps. Assuming your build and computer can handle the 40% Beyond chance, this is an excellent choice. And after our last Delirium test, I would really only recommend using the Corrupting Sextant with full Beyond. Moving on to Breach, as you can see we actually lost a little money running Breach, when you only factor in Breach drops. However, I think Breach is definitely worth running in this particular strategy, as it adds a lot of juice to our maps, and the profits lost here are more than made up for in Delirium and 6-link drops. Next we have Blight. Just like in our tower test, Blight was a huge moneymaker. Although, I do have to say, I believe we got exceptionally lucky with our Blighted map drops, as we profited on average 25 Chaos per map from Blight. However, even if we were to remove half of our Blighted maps that dropped from this test, we would still have profited over 10 Chaos per map. So Blight is definitely a keeper, and certainly worth running. The one thing I do have to say about Blight and Beyond is that it is only really viable for incredibly strong builds, and also incredibly strong computers. I have an RTX 3080, and on a couple of my maps, my game almost crashed because of Blight and beyond. Finally, we have Legion. Honestly, I'm not really sure what happened here. Usually Legion performs really well. I think we just had some bad luck. And this is an excellent example of why I prefer to run larger sized tests. As with these smaller mini tests, it is easy to get misleading results. Ultimately, I think Legion is probably worth running for the juice, even if it were to perform this poorly consistently. However, in all of my previous testing, Legion was shown to be worth running over time as long as you are willing to wait and sell your emblems as a set. Just in the last test, we made around 20 chaos per map off of Legion, and we haven't really changed anything between these two strategies. Moving back over here, you can see that we profited a total of 23 Exalted Orbs over this 12 map test, averaging out to be 311 chaos per map, or just shy of 2x per map. I do believe this number is a little inflated due to some of our extremely good RNG, but even if we were to factor out all of the Exalted Orbs dropped, like this, you can see that we still profited about 50 chaos more per map than in our last Delirium test. If you wanted to be even more conservative and remove most of our Blight revenue and a few patient cards, like this, you will see that this strategy still had higher profits per map than our last test. Ultimately, if I was going to run a Delirium strategy, I would probably try to run something like this, as I believe it outperforms the setup we had in our last test, with the caveat that you need an incredibly strong build and computer to do so. If you like this video, please hit that thumbs up button. And if you'd like to see more content like this, consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you for watching, good luck with your league, and I'll see you in the next one.